All right. Hustlers know how to make money for themselves, a Range Rover and their family, for example. So it's actually taken Africa backwards. If you think about it, it's taken Africa backwards. When you look at it from the outside in, it looks like, oh no, it's a good way for youth to practice their skills, make a living for themselves, better than crime, etc. But if you look at it long term, it's completely detrimental for the future of Africa.
Hello everyone, welcome to Africa for Dummies. Now, if you're a regular listener of our show, you know we tend to focus on political issues affecting Africa. But we thought, why not widen our scope and focus on other things? Business is an area we are very passionate about, especially considering the fact that most of Africa's population is below the age of 35 and the labor market is shrinking. We thought it'd be wise to interview some great entrepreneurs that will help you and your business, chances are you probably own one, not make some silly mistakes. Make sure to leave us a rating on whatever streaming platform you're listening to this on, as it really helps push Africa for Dummies to a wider audience. And as always, enjoy the show. Hello everybody, welcome to the Africa for Dummies podcast, hosted as always by me, Nathan, and Zenge.
Hello everybody.
Today we have a very, very special episode. It's our first episode in a new series that focuses on business in Africa, small SMEs in Africa, and how we can overcome some of the challenges that we face today. So today we have a very special guest who's called Mr. Simakoloyi. He is the MD of Blacksmith Group of Companies, which is a company that helps most SMEs in Africa meet the global market. I hope I've done justice to in introducing you, Mr. Simakoloyi.
No, that's fine. Thanks. How are you guys?
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So for all those people that don't know what you're about and don't know who you are, could you just give us an introduction as to who you are and what Blacksmith Group of Companies does?
I'm Mujo Simakoloyi. I'm an entrepreneur here in Zambia. I run an investment firm that is focusing mostly on buying distressed businesses, resuscitating them and taking them back to market. We don't buy to sell businesses, we buy for the long haul. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at those businesses from a long-term point of view as opposed to jumping in and out.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to kind of get it from take a zoomed out perspective and just look at the African continent as a whole, we're seeing that Africa has got the largest young population globally. About 60% of the population in Africa is below the age of 35. Now, do you think that this is a blessing, or do you think that this is a curse in your view?
It can only be a blessing. It can only be a blessing in the fact that the bulk of our population is below 35, because that genuinely means that everyone who's coming up with ideas now, going into business or public sector right now, is looking at the long-term vision as opposed to the short-term vision. I think for a long time in Africa's history, we've had a generation that isn't here for too long, making up policies and business directions for people who are going to be here for the long. So there's a disconnect in that sense. So if you look at it from that perspective, it can only be a blessing that the bulk of us, the decision-making power lies in those who will be here for the long term. You will see a sort of shift in the mindset of the African businessman or entrepreneur over the next few years. And you've already seen it on a smaller scale in certain countries. In the things that we are asking for, the things that we're pushing for, is more in line with what we have as a vision based off of our exposure, our education, and also our connectedness, so to speak. We're a lot more connected than the generations before us. So for me, it's a blessing. I think it will only be a good thing for business in Africa.
And from your perspective, how would you view business, startups, the startup culture in Africa? Because I remember reading a paper that was, well, it wasn't a paper, it was a magazine that was published by, I think it was Zatip. It was mainly focused on agriculture, but it mentioned that about 70% of small-scale businesses tend to be used to sustain the sole proprietor. So essentially, they're not these businesses that have a business culture behind them, that have these goals, but the goal is simply to ensure that my life is sustained. I'm able to pay for my bills and that sort of a thing. How would you?
So subsistence, basically.
Essentially, yeah. So how would you describe startup culture right now, especially with the fact that startups, it seems like being an entrepreneur has become the it thing. It's almost become very fashionable, you know?
I think there's a few parts to that question. So I'll start by giving a bit of background. You have to understand the African entrepreneur in the typical sense is getting into business to survive.
Yeah.
They're not getting into business to come up with new ideas or to somehow change the world or to create a product that will change our very existence. For example, we're getting into business to start with to survive for our immediate needs. And this comes from a gap. There's a gap in terms of employment, right? So the average businessman in Africa starts off their journey not wanting to be an entrepreneur. They're starting off their journey trying to get a job. And they can't get a job, somehow trickle their way down into a business career. Whereas in the West, in the first world, you've got people who start out in business generally because they have an idea. And the business comes after that. Now, you must look at it in this way. I don't know if I can touch on that now, but you must look at it in this way. We in Africa are capped by the fact that we can't access markets as fast as people in the first world can.
Certainly.
You would not be able to sustain a business in Africa without it making money right away. So if you start a business in Africa and your immediate goal is to make a profit, it limits your own thinking as the businessman, the brain behind everything, into what can make me money right away. And usually things that can make you money right away are things that are already in existence. So it's imitating the next thing. You look at it from a small scale, the people who sell tomatoes. If one person is selling tomatoes, you try and sell tomatoes because you think it will make you money right away. No one will try and plant aubergines and think, okay, no, maybe I'll try and introduce aubergines to the market and be the first one. So you have to look at it from that perspective. And then you must now look at it in the macro perspective, in that now, what does that do to entrepreneurs in Africa, to the rest of the world? We are not competing on the same playing field because we are not creating anything new. There's nothing that's coming out of Africa that's completely revolutionary. There's nothing that shifts the sole direction of the market. So it caps everything. Now you must make a distinction also from what is an entrepreneur, what's a businessman, what's someone who's self-employed, a sole trader. Because being a business owner means that, for example, you can step away from your business for 2 weeks and the operations and running of your business are not affected. You will still hit your KPIs. You will still make your profits. Whereas if the sole business, right, the core business that you're running depends 100% on you being there every day, then you must be very honest with yourself and say you've just created employment for yourself. So what you've done is basically just, in what in the first world you'd call a sole trader, in Africa we call a businessman in that sense. But really there is no business in that sense. It's just a person with a skill or some sort of access to market in some field that they're exploiting and they're making a paycheck. And that's that. So that's not business in the true sense, or entrepreneurship in the true sense, because to be an entrepreneur, right, it's the rule of thumb is you must do 3 things. You must come up with a product that's got a market, right, market, and then that market must be willing to pay for it. So product, you've got a market, and the capacity to buy that product. When you've got those 3 things, then you can go ahead and say, okay, now I'm getting into business. That's what business is, providing a product to a market that can pay for it. And you're just scaling it up and scaling it up and scaling it up. Now, where that doesn't exist, right? For example, if you studied medicine and you're a doctor, you can't find a job as a doctor. You open up a consultancy on Google and say, I'm a businessman. No, you're not really a businessman, because if you can't sit and type into your laptop what you think these prescriptions are supposed to be, there is no business. So make that distinction. And then you realize very quickly that there's not a large amount of entrepreneurs and businessmen in Africa, just a lot of people that have creatively come up with ways to eat.
I definitely understand. Thanks for clearing up on the distinction between the sole trader, I think, and the entrepreneur, because I think they definitely do get mixed up and confused, especially nowadays, where the entrepreneur culture has really been thrust forward. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but just to maybe for other people that don't know, do you think, first of all, how do you think we can motivate more? Because I think you kind of alluded to it, that the lack of innovation in Africa is kind of what's causing. Because I think, in my view, I think that if as Africa doesn't innovate as much, then we're always going to be lagging behind. If we just simply copy paste, which is, for example, you gave the example of, oh, this guy is doing tomatoes, let me also do tomatoes. And somebody that comes from the agriculture background, it's like when people just hear, oh, there's money in chickens, then they just go into that. So my first question would be, how do you think we can encourage innovation And is that something that we should be focusing on as young Africans?
No, you're absolutely correct. You can't overstate the importance of innovation, especially not even just in business and private sector, but generally across the whole spectrum. Why? Because look at history, right? Look at history. The greatest economies, from the beginning of time, the first recordings that we had, the greatest economy was India at first, right? And then we moved on to what now you guys, well, then was called Great Britain. I don't know if it's still Great Britain now, or you just say United Kingdom. But all these things were built off of certain different things, right? So, for example, in the UK, their quick access to market was through artillery. They came up with innovations in artillery that changed warfare. In America, the combustion engine. The combustion engine was the first driving product that built America, right? And then you got countries like India that before that were traders. Now in Africa, you tell me what we have originally brought to market. Nothing. Right? So that automatically means that we're not competing. There's nothing new. There's nothing that we are creating that's going to shift the entire direction of our living. So if that's the case, then that means that as business people, we'll only benefit from the trickle-down effects. So if it's in a typical example, for example, if it's raw materials, we'll only benefit from the digging out of the ground, and then everything else after that, we've got no clue. We've got no piece of the pie. So that means that we'll never be able to be in a position where we can actually compete with everyone else. Right now, the direction I think is changing slightly because of exposure. It's changing slightly because of exposure. You've got people involved in business now in Africa that have been trained and educated, like myself, for example, in the United Kingdom. So that opens up your eyes to see how the people are doing business. And then when you come back home, and I like to emphasize on this, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you've decided on that journey, when you've got the necessary skills to fully exploit that passion, you need to come back to Africa, right? Because honestly speaking, there's no better place to do business than in Africa right now. This is just a fact. You've got the largest quantities of unexplored raw materials. You've got the largest quantities of unexplored market. If you think about the population right now, we're just over 1 billion and change. So if you think more than half of that is under 35. Right? The limitations that we have in terms of market are borders. We have to pay customs and excise duties to cross countries that they don't have in the United States or in Europe, for example. But when you look at the true unexploited potential, labor is at its cheapest in Africa. Raw materials are at their cheapest in Africa. Right? So if you've got those skills, you're coming into this place at a head start. Right? You're coming, for example, when I came back from university, I felt as if I was already 5-6 steps ahead of the average businessman here because I knew exactly what the end game looked like. You know, I spent my time getting trained in the first world and seeing how they were exploiting what we in Africa just considered a raw material. For them, it's a completely deciding factor in the economy. So those things are coming into play now. But the problem is a lot of our youth, right, stay. Because it's easier to just join a system that's already there and you stick with that system and you get a good paycheck. And actually, this is a two-part problem because the problem is that the brilliant youth that we've got that go out to trade are poached very quickly by the corporate worlds in the first world and given a hefty paycheck.
Very true.
Now, how do you convince someone who's got a hefty paycheck, a good house, good car,
that was going to be my next
a
question.
beautiful wife, perhaps, to come back home and start from scratch? Right. So me, when I left university, I finished university at 11 o'clock at 21 hours. I was on a flight coming back home. I was so fixated on the fact that I wanted to be back at home, and I knew exactly where I was going. This is fact. So I knew exactly where I was going. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I came 21 hours on a flight coming back home. The next day at 7 hours back on the ground trying to set up my business and start working. So I knew exactly what I was in the United Kingdom for. Right. To learn and to be exposed. And when I came back, it was very easy to then go in and innovate because I felt as if I already knew. And the thing is, when you're starting from zero, the worst case is you lose zero. And I've been telling this to many youths, right? If you're starting from zero, the worst case is you lose zero. I can't go any worse than zero. So that's probably the best time to try your hand at business, is when you've got nothing to lose. Why would you try your hand at business after you've built a 10-year career in corporate world in London?
Okay, so time for a quick break. I hope you guys are taking notes. I know I am. This is a really, really great and insightful episode. Again, thank you so much for rocking with us. Thank you so much for all the encouraging words. that you've given us. If you would like to ask questions for our next entrepreneurial guests, please be sure to reach out to us on our Instagram page, our Twitter page. I think we just created a new Facebook page. You can hit us up on africaForDummies@gmail.com. Any place you can find Africa for Dummies, you can just shoot us an email or a text or whatever it is, and we'll be sure to ask our guests that question. Be sure to leave us a rating, as it really helps to push our podcast to a wider audience, and continue to give us some support. And back to the episode.
Anyway, that's a very good segue into basically the next question. We're looking at Africa has experienced enormous growth in the last 10, 20 years. We're looking at figures of 7%, 10%. Kenya, I think in the last decade has grown almost on average at around 5, 6%, despite terrorist attacks and so on and so forth, and massive innovations all over. But what we can see is that growth, that economic growth, has resulted in something called jobless growth. Unemployment remains stubbornly high. Poverty remains stubbornly high. And this is particularly affecting the youth. Of course, there's been a middle class that has emerged across Africa, but this has particularly affected African youth. So there's a term that has come up with people that sort of have not been able to get, white collar jobs and so on, the hustle culture. And that has sort of been confused or, used interchangeably with entrepreneurship. The Nigerian hustle or South African hustle, call it whatever you want, but it's sort of like a buzzword. Just give us your opinions on what that's about, and what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the myths about that?
Hustle culture, I think, again, has come out of the fact that there's a gap in employment, right? But then you must look at it like this. In my personal view, I'm against it because it encourages youths to believe that they've got a safety net that they don't really have. And hustle culture is basically, in simple terms, stringing money from one person to another person and executing a commission for yourself, right? There is no product that you're taking to market. There's no innovation. There's no development. I'm just taking something from point A to point B and getting a commission for it, right? I'm hustling, so to speak. Now, let's look at facts. I'm in Zambia right now. So Zambia's GDP is what, plus minus 25 billion?
I need to check. I would have to look for that.
Yeah. It's around
GNP, right?
Billion.
So GDP is
gross
everyone. We're counting everyone. Yeah. So now GNP, does anyone know what those figures are for Zambia?
No.
Does anyone know what that figure is for Zambia? No. And the simple reason is that the contribution that this so-called hustling culture has to the Zambian basket is almost zero. It's so low that the actual figure is not worth us discussing. Now, that's the result of hustle culture, right? Hustlers don't pay taxes. Hustlers don't employ, right? Hustlers aren't giving withholding taxes on properties that are getting passive income. All right. Hustlers know how to make money for themselves, a Range Rover and their family, for example. So it's actually taken Africa backwards. If you think about it, it's taken Africa backwards. When you look at it from the outside in, it looks like, oh no, it's a good way for youth to practice their skills, make a living for themselves, better than crime, etc. But if you look at it long term, it's completely detrimental for the future of Africa. Because you'll have a group of youths, a large group of youths that will believe, because of their hustling and the commissions that they're making off their hustling, they can excuse real businesses, real ideas, real developments. And the only things that stand the test of time is real businesses. Because those are the only things that have the fortitude to actually withstand the things that happen over time. For example, recessions, for example, COVID, right? Hustling doesn't withstand those things.
So essentially you're saying that hustling is not concrete and it doesn't pay taxes.
No, it's got really no contribution to the economy. It's good for you and your pocket, but it's got no contribution to the economy. Now, what does that do to us now on a global scale? It means that even when we go, for example, to present what it is that we're developing here in Zambia or in Africa to the first world, no one takes us serious. Because the odds that an African has a well-structured business, right, with properly auditable revenue streams, employment, taxes, is almost zero.
Yeah.
So we have to quickly start curbing this hustle culture, in my opinion. And people who genuinely have a passion for this need to formalize it, right? In the West, what they call consultancy, in Africa, we call hustling.
Yeah.
It has to be well structured. It has to be well structured, well regulated, so that these hustlers can actually see pinpoints of the progression and see whether or not they're actually making something work, or they're just making a lot of money 1 year and completely broke for 3 years, then making more money. And you actually see very wealthy hustlers. But this, again, in my opinion, is because very few Zambian businessmen, African businessmen, have got mentors that they can actually structure their businesses off of. People to guide you who've done it the right way. Because you want the results of their business, but you don't want to have the structures, systems, and procedures that have taken them to that result. You want to get straight to the result. Right?
Yeah.
You want the nice cars, the nice watches, the private jets, and skip everything in between.
Yeah.
And that's what hustling does. Hustling glorifies the result and not the process.
And I guess this is another good segue. You speak of the result and not the process. So if somebody like myself who's young might look at you and say, "Oh, I want that," and things like that. But I guess the process and some of the challenges are not highlighted quite well. So what are some of the challenges that you faced just as a young entrepreneur, even coming up throughout the process and even at the stage that you're at now?
I faced many challenges over the years. I've been doing business full-time for 7 years now. So the first few challenges, obviously, is taking your concept that's in your head and actually getting people to capitalize that project, access to money. The conception that we have in Africa is that the banks are working for you, right? It's not the job of a bank to provide seed money. And I'll explain why. The reason why all the products that a bank creates, right, are all involved in debt, or are all requiring track records, are all requiring asset security, is because the bank is a partner of a proven track record. What in the UK, for example, you'd go and say a venture capitalist, you can go to a venture capitalist and say, "Oh no, I have this idea, I want to get into business," and you just keep on knocking on doors until eventually you have access to money. In Africa, it's not there. There's very few investment firms that will take an idea seriously enough to put money into it. So when I started out in business, that concept for me didn't register. I thought the banks were there to partner with me. I thought the banks wanted to get me off the ground so I could succeed, and then eventually it would be money for them, right? But that's not the job of a bank. The job of the bank is not in any way to get you off the ground. The job of the bank is to see success, jump on success, make a bit of money off of that success, and move on. So access to money is one thing. Two, structures of businesses. I told you just now about mentorship and structuring your business off of someone who's successful already. I only got my first mentor 4 years into business.
Wow.
For 4 years, it was trial and error. If I had my mentor from my first year, I'll give you just a quick example of how effective someone who's successful is. I ran another company for 4 years, got into a mentorship program, successful businessman in Zambia, and in 2 years sold the business for over 100 million.
Wow.
So you must look at the effects of proper mentorship. The effects of proper mentorship will completely shift your direction in business and shift your mindset. You become exposed to things that you would not ordinarily see. I didn't know the importance of having an accountant.
And right? Sorry, I know that Zeng is just reminding me about time, but this is something I'm really into because I also would like to get into the startup. But I remember when I was discussing this, the importance of a mentor with a friend of mine. I think he kept hitting me with this question, which is, where do I find a good mentor? So
you knock on doors of people that you think are successful, not as a result, not successful with the result, successful in process.
Okay.
All right. Okay. What I'll do is I'll cancel my next meeting so I can speak properly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So now we have time.
Thank you so much.
We have time.
Yeah.
You don't want to be inspired by a result. You want to be inspired by a process. All right. And this for me is the same in anything. If you're a sportsman, if you're a politician, if you're a businessman, find a business person whose process inspires you. Listen to their story. And when you understand their story and are inspired by their story, then ask to be mentored by them. Don't go and find the richest businessman and then say, oh, please mentor me. Because more often than not, the businessman that has failed has got more lessons to teach you than a businessman that succeeded from the jump. Okay, so that's very important for the youth. I know nowadays with social media and the perception of success, it's very easy to jump onto a train and say, oh no, I think he succeeded, so let me jump on. No.
Yeah.
You want to quickly identify with the process that aligns with your own principles,
Yeah.
your own integrity, your own characteristics, because then you'll be able to take them on more easily than someone who shows you a result. It's very easy to show a result, but how do we get to that result? That becomes overwhelming. That becomes depressing, because as soon as that potential business person fails, they rush back and say, maybe I'm not cut out for business. But you didn't tell them how many times you failed. Right? If I came and told you guys how much money I've lost over the years in business transactions gone wrong, it would probably scare you, right? But if I told you how much I've made, everyone would want to do business.
Yeah.
You get the point. So what you want to learn is the process. Learn the process that you can repeat over and over and over again. Because I told you business is only 3 things.
Yeah.
But if you have the skills to repeat it over and over and over again, that's where scalability comes in.
Yeah. And well, so many questions that are just flying in my head. So Zengi, please just jump in and stop me at any moment. But you know, you mentioned that and I'm kind of jumping back and forth here, so sorry to the listeners if this seems unstructured. You know, you mentioned that you came back and you had you started your business almost immediately. My question would be, number one, did you have that idea like before you came back? And also, at what point did you realize like, oh, I think this might work? Because I think before you get into a business, you know, you always have the cold feet of what if it doesn't work? What if I lose a lot of money and that sort of a thing? So at what point did you realize like, okay, this is something that and you mentioned that you did lose a lot of money, and I know the pain of how that definitely not at the same scale, but you know, it still hurts. So at what point did you realize that come rain, come sunshine, I'm still going to pursue this because I know this works? And also, what are some of the signs? It could be financial and anything else that one should look for to say that, okay, this idea is something worth pursuing.
Okay, that's a loaded question.
Sorry about that.
To simplify it, is basically asking, what how do you identify a goal, a challenge that is worth pursuing? And then the other one is, how do you maintain resilience and persistence when you're trying to make money, when you go through those hurdles, basically?
No, as well as because I think his company also deals with SMEs and things like that. So I'd just like to know what's some of the criteria that I mean, he doesn't have to give us his secret formula, but you know, what are some of the things that he looks at, you know, to see this is an idea that's worth salvaging or pursuing.
Look, in the beginning, if you explore 10 ideas, I can guarantee you're going to fail on 9. This is a fact. Right? But like I said in the beginning, when you're starting from 0, you've got 0 to lose. Right? So you have to understand, regardless what your fears are. When I left university, I think I had like 3,000 pounds in savings. And that was my entire net worth. Like that was everything that I had at the time or something like that. And I lost it all in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Right? So you must understand, when you go and you say, I'm betting on myself, the chances are, truthfully, 1, you don't have the skills to compete with the big people. 2, you're going to fail and probably lose 90% of all of the money that you already have. 3, that your business idea, the first one, is probably going to be garbage. But 4, there is no limitations on starting over and over again. That's the best part with being a business person, right? There's no limitations on starting over and over again. And this for me, I never understood. To this day, I don't understand. If you're going to spend 2 years, 3 years, 4 years trying to build someone else's idea, why won't you spend 1 year trying to build your own? It makes no sense to me. There are certain key indicators that you need to look at I in my own business practice, I've got principles that I follow, and one of them is hyper-realism, right? I'm extremely realistic with myself, extremely critical with myself, right? On the one scale, as every business person should be, is to be very confident in your dream, your goal, but also be hyper-realist. When you sit down on your own with your notepad or nowadays iPad, right? Sit down and be a hyper-realist. Look and see, how am I actually doing? And that's not to say stop completely pursuing business. That's to say maybe I just need to shift or tweak a certain thing in my business and I might be able to succeed. When I came back, my first business was transport. I was in passenger transport. And I got hit every left, right, and center. Every day was a headache, to the point I had to sell my own personal car to pay off my bills in business, because many times the month is longer than the money. We don't have enough money to get to the end of the month. So it's almost never that you get to the end of the month and you think, I've got more money than I need in the first few years of business. You are always chasing your tail. And the thing with successful business people I've learned is that they look at it as a process, as a journey. So the failure isn't the destination, the failure is a journey. For example, if you're living from Lusaka to Johannesburg and you're driving by road, and you drove from here to Livingston and found that the gate in Livingston was broken, you would not stop in Livingston and drive back to Lusaka. You would probably look for the quickest access route to drive around Livingston. Because your journey is to Johannesburg. As far as you know, it's Johannesburg, right? So the thing is to continuously believe in a small idea, a small part of the idea, while keeping your goals on the big idea. Yes, you might want to make hefty amounts of money, employ thousands of people, but right now, can you afford to employ 5? So can I make the paycheck for the 5?
Okay.
Then can I make the paycheck for the 10? Because all across the board, the systems are almost the same, right? So if your idea meets the 3 rules of thumb I gave you, right? And you feel as if, look, I've got a market, they can pay for it, and my idea makes sense. You owe it to yourself to tweak and change that idea until you fully exhausted every opportunity in that idea. And then you move on to the next. But the only difference with business, unlike a job, is at the end of the month, everyone is looking at you. I think by the time I was 20 years old or 21 years old, I had like 10 employees full-time who all had kids. I was the youngest in the company, and they all depended on me to make sure that there was enough money at the end of the month for them to feed their kids and salaries and paychecks, stuff like that. So it's an enormous responsibility to take on. And that's why I'm very particular about what you call an entrepreneur or a businessman.
I see.
Right. So understand those things and then pursue them. You know exactly what the West is. The West is you can lose the 0 that you started with.
Certainly.
Okay, that's actually a very good segue into the next question. You mentioned that you are among the youngest amongst your colleagues, and we wanted to look at the question. Yeah, we wanted to look at the question on the whole idea of placing primacy on age and experience in Africa. The whole, some people call it Ubuntu, where you have to respect age and wisdom. What personal challenges have you faced as a young person in business in a society that has a high premium on age and experience? Go ahead.
Look, guys, doing business in Africa and doing business in the rest of the world is very similar in that aspect, right? Being young is being young, right? More often than not, when you're young, you're very idealistic, very hopeful, not too realistic on the goals and the things that you can actually achieve. I'll tell you a quick story. I remember, I think it was 5 years ago, I had a business and we're looking to buy a premises in Dola, and the premises was quite expensive at the time. I think it was a 20 million kwacha building, and I was in the car with my managers for my business, and I was sitting in the middle of the back seat of the car. So the agent was showing us the property, went and showed the property to everyone else in the car except me, right? So he took my staff, my managers around, and at the end of the tour, he comes back to the car and he says, oh, Paul, who was my manager, what do you think about the property? And then Paul says, actually, I'm not the decision maker. The decision maker is the managing director, and he's in the car, right? And then the agent now becomes completely stone-faced and starts wondering now how he's disrespected me and how I want to do the deal. But at the end of the day, that's the reaction you're going to get everywhere, because you're young, right? You're young, you're inexperienced. And it's not a challenge all the time. It's a challenge sometimes, but at the end of the day, your track record speaks for itself.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. That was first of our episode with Mr. Simakoloyi. We had a really great conversation that we just had to cut it into two. Be sure to tune in next week for the second part of this episode, where we discuss things about values and what sort of values entrepreneur is supposed to have and why are these important, and gives you some practical advice. So we really hope that you like this one. Be sure to check the next episode dropping in next week, and thank you very much for listening.